Hello, dear viewers. Today, for the first time, I will have a conversation with Aleksandr Radunsky. Hello, Aleksandr.
Hello, Dennis.
Before we move on to the main topic, so to speak, I would like to ask you to briefly tell us about yourself, since not everyone may know you, at least my audience, so that they understand who I am having a conversation with.
My name is Aleksandr Radunsky. Thank you, Dennis, for inviting me. And I am originally from Belarus. I was born, grew up, got married, and studied at the university in Minsk. And in 1989, in August, I emigrated from the Soviet Union to America. Back then, we were all stripped of our citizenship and had to wait a month in Austria and 5 months in Italy. We ended up in the state of Iowa, in the city of Des Moines. A couple of months later, we moved from there to the biggest city nearby. I didn't have any friends or acquaintances in America. And I rented an apartment with my family for $400 in a suburb of Chicago. The neighborhood is called Skokie. And I started working for $4 an hour as a laborer in a Greek grocery store. And I was almost 32 years old at that time. This year I'm turning 68. And I worked at various low-paying jobs. I delivered pizza, worked in the stockroom at a shoe store, and was a salesperson in a shoe store. And a lot of other things like that, until I got into business in 1991. I bought a used car at an auction and sent it to Minsk. And that's how my business activity started. And in 1991, I'll brag a little, by 1995, the turnover of my company was already $500 million. And since then, I have built 7 different businesses in various industries. I have never worked with governments or budgets. All of this started with my small savings. Later, they weren't so small anymore. Well, and my main business, in those years, I don't know, you can cut this out if needed because they always rate me 18 plus. My main business was cigarettes. I was the largest distributor. By 1995, I was already the largest distributor of Philip Morris in Europe. As I mentioned, turnover was already $500 million at that time. And I had distribution in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. In Kyiv, I worked with the company Bolshaya. Medveditsa, I remember Dima Ilmanov worked with Dnipro. In Dnipropetrovsk, I think the company was called Remford. There was a distributor in Odessa. In short, my biggest business in the 90s was cigarette distribution from many companies, but the main one was Philip Morris. Once again, you can cut this out because can I just repeat now that I was simply doing business? Well, if anyone's interested, they can check it out on my website later or on my platform. It doesn't matter. And I worked I started in Belarus, but since 1992, I was already living between Moscow and Chicago. And I had once again different businesses in different industries. But in 2014, when Crimea happened, I already realized that I wanted to cut ties with Russia. But I really got into trouble in Ukraine in 2008. And I don't want to say anything bad, but it was probably the mentality of the people I worked with. And you can ask me later if you want what the problem was. But I'll tell you what the problem is. And first of all, I don't depend on anyone. I say what I think and what I want to say. And so I have a problem on my YouTube channel that YouTube bans me. And people write to me, well, you speak out against Russia and you get banned. Those Z supporters there. You speak out against Zelensky and you get banned by Zelensky supporters. But I say no one pays me. I express my own thoughts. I want to have freedom of speech. I understand there might be censorship everywhere, but I say what I think. And I don't depend on anyone, thank God. In short, in 2014, when Crimea happened, I packed my things and sold what I could. And in September 2014, I left this part of the world, deciding that I no longer wanted to do business. Not in Russia, not in Belarus, not in Ukraine, not in Kazakhstan, where I used to do business. And over these years, I only went back once. In 2017, for 10 days, I came to Moscow to visit friends, but I didn't do any business there. And why did I leave after Crimea? When Crimea happened in 2014, Not because I'm some kind of patriot of Ukraine, so to speak. I just thought it was wrong, of course. You can't take what isn't yours by invading. But I understood as a businessman that the consequences would be bad. Many people in Russia didn't understand that at the time. They said Crimea is ours, but I was against it. I didn't think that Crimea was ours. At the same time, I often traveled from Moscow to Crimea, and even though it was ours, still it was Ukrainian, but there were no obstacles for anyone who traveled from Russia. And when I later heard that no one speaks Russian there, well, I spoke Russian with everyone everywhere. It was just fine. And because someone writes to me on my YouTube channel, on my channels, are you Russian or something like that? Well, there are a lot of hateful comments. I say, I'm from Belarus. Belarus. I don't have and never had either a Russian passport or a Ukrainian one. We were stripped of our USSR citizenship in 1989 when I was leaving, and I only have American citizenship. I don't have and never had either Russian or Ukrainian citizenship. So accusing me of being from Russia or something like that is just silly.
Well,
in short, I'm an entrepreneur. I immediately reacted to Crimea and left. And since then, well, when the war started in 2022, of course, I was completely shocked. And, well, I didn't understand at all because many Americans here asked me where I live. I live. Yes, I live in New York and in Chicago. And since I'm Russian speaking, Americans asked me if it's really true that Russia would attack there.
I said no.
That's impossible. It's like Canada attacking or America attacking Canada. And then it happened. And I was shocked by Putin at that time. And I considered Zelensky a hero when he came out on Bankova Street. And because, yes, I had an office in Mandarin Plaza when I was doing business in Kiev. And I also had a development business in Odessa where I lost a lot, as I said, in 2008. I also had a large development business in Ukraine. And when Zelensky came out, I remember he said, Podolyak is here, this person is here, I am here. I thought that Zelensky was a hero. And for a long time, well, for some time, I really thought so. Then after a while, my opinion changed.
But we'll get to that in a moment. We'll get to it so we don't jump too far ahead. Let me know if we've jumped ahead.
I've introduced myself more or less in broad strokes, but feel free to clarify anything if needed.
Yes, during the broadcast, were you a politically engaged person before Crimea, or did you really get deeply involved in 2014?
I've always followed politics throughout my life. Why? Because yes, in the Soviet Union, I was an underground businessman. I left when I was almost 31 years old. And before that, well, I was, quite a serious underground businessman by Soviet standards. And I always understood, always, all my life, that business depends on politics. You can't hide anywhere. When someone says, I'm not interested in politics, not interested. I'm doing business. But one day you'll wake up, and your business will be gone because of politics or because of some politician. That's why I've always followed politics all my life. And one of the reasons why I left the Union was also because I was fed up with those political briefings in Soviet times where everyone lied, and there were all those party activists. I mean, they lied about politics too. I really didn't like any of that. So even after I left, I always kept following politics. So I followed Yeltsin's politics and Putin's politics. And I think that if Putin had left in 2008, he would have been a hero. But when he came back, well, I really didn't like that. And of course, I don't like that Putin has been in power for so many years, just like Lukashenko has been in power for so many years. Well, so I've always followed politics. I believe that you can't be any kind of businessman if you don't understand what's happening in politics.
Yes. Tell me, you said that you didn't believe in a full-scale war. And also, let's say before Crimea, was there a point when you yourself realized, well, let's put it this way, understood who Putin really was, that he basically intended to act aggressively, and that things would not go well in this part of the world?
Look, honestly, I was very hopeful about Putin in the 2000s when he came to power. Well, first of all, even back in the 90s, Lushkov went to Crimea, and there were Zhirinovsky, Lushkov, and all the others. They were saying, Crimea, Crimea. I didn't take it seriously since there's a country that Crimea belongs to. And it never even crossed my mind that you could just take something away from someone. I mean, the strong take from the weak. After that, well, in business, I understood that the world is like a jungle, and in the jungle, the strongest wins. But I didn't think that could happen. But you asked about Putin in 2007. Putin spoke at the Munich conference. I heard his speech. But again, in 2008, there was a crisis. I look at everything as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, how this affects the whole world. And in the first years, up until 2006, 2007, and even 2008, Russia was booming economically. Probably this also went to Putin's head, seeing how Russia was developing. But to be fair, if in the 90s business in Belarus, well, with Lukashenko, things were different there. I'm from Belarus and had a business there too. But in the 90s in Russia, it was gray or black. But with Putin's arrival, many companies started to open up and pay taxes. It became more, well, open to foreign investment because foreigners saw how the country was developing. This was the early 2000s. They were investing money. And in order for them to invest money, you had to show numbers. And before that, there were no numbers. Business was black, taxes were black, everything was black. Well, not everywhere, of course, but still. And that's the problem of Ukraine. And in those same years, and I didn't understand it then, in Ukraine, people probably didn't believe in the future. And to them, the future still looked bleak. Only some companies started to think about capitalization, maybe going public. So in Russia, this was happening everywhere. In Moscow, well, I worked in other places too. I had distribution businesses. I had different businesses. If anyone is interested, they can check my LinkedIn or you can leave it. And on my 2 YouTube channels, I talk about both business and my views on politics. That's why I was always keeping track. And I thought that until 2007, until I heard Putin's speech, everything was fine. Let's put it that way.
You mentioned your YouTube channels. Let me repeat it for the viewers. You have 2 YouTube channels. One is about politics, the other is about business.
Yes. Look, one is called Aleksandr Radunsky in Russian. There I talk not only about politics, I talk about what's happening in America. Mostly, that's what I talk about. Yes, I started the channel about a month and a half or 2 before the American elections began. And that was around October of 2024. That's when I started my YouTube channel where I thought I would talk about America. Because I was really annoyed by the Democrats, Kamala Harris, Biden, and all the others. And I understood what kind of person Trump was, that he wasn't an ordinary person. But I thought that if someone didn't come along to break all this, the world would break instead. And Trump won. And I kept talking on my channel about DEI, about defund police, about transgender people, about theft in America, about corruption. So basically, I always try to talk about problems and draw my viewers' attention to them. Because America is a great country. I really love it. And there are a lot of good things, but if I don't pay attention and others don't see the problems, we'll never fix them. That's why I talk about problems in medicine, insurance. I talk about corruption. On my channel, it's Aleksandr Radunsky, and there's a channel called Alex Radunsky Business, where I mainly talk about business and investments and how politics also partially affects entrepreneurship around the world. These are my 2 channels. On one of the channels, in just a year and a half, I have almost 50,000, which YouTube has really suppressed now because of my speeches. Half of my videos are marked 18 plus. And now, because of my speeches about Zelensky, my videos aren't being shown to new subscribers at all. And the second channel has 15,000. It's about 5 months old. So I started an Instagram account. There I have 33,000. And on Facebook, I have 17,000. I think that's pretty good for a year.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
You mentioned that you considered Zelensky a hero. Back then, at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, that automatically puts you on Ukraine's side, so to speak. You condemn Putin's aggression. That's kind of obvious to everyone by default. And how do you feel about Zelensky now?
Look, my attitude towards Russia hasn't changed. But my attitude towards Zelensky has changed drastically. But as I already said, I always followed politics. I watched Putin very closely. And I dreamed that Putin would leave sometime after 2008. He left, but then he came back. I dreamed about that. And I understood who Putin was. And I always talk about that. Putin is a street guy. What does street guy mean? I'm a street guy myself. I grew up in the yard. I fought. So I'm a street guy. So Putin, again, let me say I have a negative opinion of Putin, but you have to respect certain qualities. So if Putin, I'm saying somewhere I said, if Putin makes a promise, Putin makes promises to people or others. I don't pay attention to what he says, though he always says all the right things. But if Putin shakes someone's hand, if he looks someone in the eye and says something and shakes their hand, Putin will keep his word. He won't back down from that. I saw that Zelensky, after shaking hands, immediately forgets about it. And it turned out that I was talking to a couple of people, very serious ones, and they say that's the mentality of many people there, including businessmen. They promised you something, shook your hand, and forgot about it. That's the mentality. So when I saw that Zelensky promised something and then didn't do it, well, I was shocked because he's supposed to be, well, the president of the country. That's why I started paying closer attention to what Zelensky was actually doing.
And at what point did your opinion of him start to change dramatically? About him?
Yes, yes, I can say when. Of course, I am against any wars. For me, the most important thing is that people don't die. We should always negotiate diplomatically. But I think, well, that's my opinion once again. In 2014, Russia didn't have Zelensky yet. Nevertheless, the territory was taken. But I believe that Putin attacked Russia, attacked Ukraine due to personal restrictions and my view of Zelensky. That's my opinion. So I understand Putin as a person. Once again, my best skills are as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, the psychology of people. Because when you do business with someone, and my biggest business had a turnover of 1.6 billion, and there were 20,000 people working there. You have to understand the psychology of the people you're dealing with, because many want to deceive you, trick you, steal from you. And I think that I understand psychology quite well. That's why I lost my train of thought just now, period.
When did your opinion of Zelensky change, or when did that turning point start?
When I saw that, well, yes, Russia was already capturing territory. I always said Russia is, well, stronger. Well, it's clear that Zelensky was being helped all the time. The Democrats were helping, and Europe was helping. Everyone was helping. But when I saw that negotiations had started, that was already, well, I'm not talking about the Istanbul negotiations at the beginning. That's not what I mean. That's when things started to change for me. Medinsky came to the negotiations then, I think it was the year 2024. Then Ushakov, Kirill Dmitriev. And I personally know Kirill well. And by the way, he used to work in Ukraine, and he was the head of the office of Pinchuk's private equity company. And I know a lot of people in Russia, many at a very high level, personally. And when these negotiations started, I saw that Zelensky said this, even though the meetings between the Americans and the Russians hadn't started yet. It was the end, I think, of 24. He said, we will not accept any agreements. And there was nothing yet. They hadn't agreed on anything. It was just preliminary. And I always thought, just like Trump did. And how did Trump think? He thought he'd tap Putin on the knee and say, well, Volodya, that's enough. Come on, wrap it up. He'd tap Zelensky on the knee too. He'd say, come on, Volodya, that's enough. Finish up. But he says that turned out to be the hardest part, that he couldn't tap on the knee. And I understand why, and with whom he couldn't do it. And it's clear that Trump's attitude towards Zelensky goes back to his first term. Because when Shokin tried to give some information about Borisov, you see, I keep track of the situation, even though I'm not from Ukraine, but I follow it because I read. Actually, Shokin, the prosecutor general, was fired at that time, and they tried to impeach Trump. At the same time, there was a time when an English company did research on me as a developer. And when I later happened to see what they wrote about me, it was a real nightmare. It was about the same as what they did to Trump with the Steele dossier. That's it. It's the same as with me. I understood that it was all lies, just lies. That Trump came and peed on the bed. They wrote about the bed where Obama slept. Well, you really can't believe things like that. And that was the basis for announcing impeachment against Trump. And when he asked Zelensky for information about Hunter Biden, Zelensky fired Shokin, and they didn't give any information about Borisov.
It was Poroshenko who fired Shokin. That was even before Shokin.
Maybe Poroshenko. In short, Zelensky helped Biden more and didn't help Trump at all. And I think from that moment on, understanding perfectly the psychology and personality type of Trump, Zelensky already became, well, not exactly an enemy, but close to it. Well, I think Trump really doesn't like Zelensky, but that's when it started. And then Zelensky made it worse. So when I saw that Zelensky, at the end of 2024, refused to discuss any decisions, there weren't any yet, I started to pay closer attention. Then I noticed that Zelensky kept asking for help all the time. And I started making videos saying that, well, I'm for Ukraine, I'm against Russia, and I want them to help. But I said, well, you have to behave somehow. Trump was already president by then.
I said,
you can't demand help. Help is there to be asked for, that's one. Second, but if you insult the person you're asking for help from, then why are you doing that? And I released these videos at the beginning of 2025. Then I released a video when there was a meeting between Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office, and I was shocked by that. And there I said what I thought was happening. And that's why, since the end of 2024 and into 2025, I started to closely follow and analyze the psychology of why Zelensky is doing this. And to be honest, I still don't fully, no, now I understand perfectly what he's doing in the last year or so. But back then I didn't understand yet.
Mm-hmm. But you must have some acquaintances, of course. And surely there are also people from the post-Soviet space. Did you discuss this situation? What's the mood there, at least in your circle of acquaintances, about Zelensky and the situation?
Do you mean Ukraine or Russia or Belarus? Ukraine?
Ukraine.
Ukraine?
Zelensky, yes.
Yes. I think
very few people support Russia in this situation. Why do I say that?
Well, those who live there in Russia, who understand what's happening, well, whose brains have already been washed. But of course, there are some, because what else can they do? Either go into internal exile or they'll get beaten up. So they've already resigned themselves and don't say anything. But of course, when the war started, well, any businessman, anyone understood that was it for business. The oligarchs, who used to live better than Saudi princes, suddenly became unable to leave the country and so on. Well, that's obvious. Of course, I know a lot of people in Ukraine. I work there, and there are some really good guys at a high level. I won't mention any names, but there are many. And of course, lately I don't talk to them about certain topics. Well, we just avoid that subject because I understand that everyone is under surveillance. But when the war just started, I don't want to talk about myself. But some of my acquaintances started helping, and one of them told me that he gave 70 as a kickback to get something done, to bring something there. I don't know what it was. It was related to medicine. He had some kind of startup, and in order for them to start providing services from America, they gave someone almost 170 from something I don't remember. So I kept hearing that there were constant kickbacks. That's why, as a person, well, lately for the past year and a half, for a year and a half, I want Ukraine not to give up any territories. I want there to be peace for people not to die, but I understand that Russia is stronger both financially and militarily, that Putin is the only one in charge there and no one can remove him. And as long as he is alive, you shouldn't mock or insult Putin, because by doing so, you only make it less likely to have a chance to talk to him. But when I saw that they were taking kickbacks, well, it's war. Everyone must contribute. Everything for the war. Remember, everything for the front, everything for victory. And here's some people are taking kickbacks. And then I started looking into this corruption around Zelensky, and supposedly the Tsar doesn't know, but Yermak does. Yes. And I, as a businessman, just imagine, let's say I have a business and I'm doing business with someone, with another company. I look at everything as a businessman. And I know that I'll give some money there so that they'll buy something for me. And on the other hand, I understand that this money will be stolen, is being stolen. So of course I won't give the money because it's being stolen. It's a different story if we consider that I'm the European Union, which gives money, and there it's being stolen. If I were personally giving the money, I would want to be given a very detailed report on where the money went, how it was spent, literally down to the last penny. And what if I have a big company? And if I have some people working for me who are giving out the money, it's quite possible that only 50% of the money actually gets there, and the other 50% might stay with those people. I just don't know. That's why in business, I'm actually not the right person for handling money. I would find partners who would take care of the finances while I focused on development and many other things. I don't like counting money, but in business, counting money is one of the most important things. You have to control the money. You can't give out money without oversight or knowing where it's going. Well, it's clear where the money goes. It goes to Mindich, it goes to Ermak, and to many others who are unnamed. Some are already under investigation and some have run away. But again, someone tells me, listen, why are you even getting involved in Ukraine? What does it matter to you? And I say, well, I'm paying. I was saying this back when Biden was there and Trump was there. America was helping, and I pay quite a lot of taxes in America. I say, why? Because I want to know where my money is going, how it's being stolen. That's why it pisses me off. If I understood that the money wasn't being stolen and everything was being done properly, I would have a completely different opinion. I think Trump understands this too. And that's why, as a businessman, he looks at it. Money is given and it's being stolen. He says, we won't give any more money. Let them give it to those who don't care. And I believe that this is a huge problem. And my opinion, I've been saying this all the time lately, is that if Zelensky wasn't the president of Ukraine, Trump would be helping Ukraine a lot more. And of course, I don't believe that there's someone like Rashkin in America who said after the meeting between Trump and Zelensky that Zelensky is a lion and Trump is a swindler. So Trump, just like any businessman, understands when things are being stolen. And for him, well, it really affects the mindset of a normal entrepreneur.
All right. And in this circle of your acquaintances, it doesn't matter where they are. But of course, the most interesting are those immigrants who, like you, come from the post-Soviet space and live in the US. Is there anyone left, in short, who still sees things through rose-colored glasses, thinking that Zelensky is the leader of the free world, that everything is right, and continues to believe that? Yes, yes.
I have one friend, a very good person, by the way, from Kiev. Yes, under my videos, when I talk about Zelensky or something else, people, well, call me names. And I see that, well, most likely these are Jews who live in America with ties to Ukraine. And they tell me, a crew is coming for you, will finish you off, will cut you, and so on. Honestly, this person, my friend, I won't say his name, it's not important. He says, we won't give up an inch of land. And these Jews here who support Ukraine, and I myself support Ukraine, but they are ready to fight to the last Ukrainian who is in Ukraine. So I say, go there, take up arms, and get into the trenches. But you say from here, let's not give up an inch of land there, even if it's to the last Ukrainian. But I think we need to negotiate and give it up, then return it diplomatically. But we need to stop the deaths. We need to stop the killings. These are two Slavic peoples. And it's clear that nothing affects Putin. But he is ready to stop. In my opinion, again, Russia has much more powerful weapons than Ukraine. In Ukraine, they're doing great. They have drones and they're really tormenting Russia right now. But if Russia really starts to use its weapons to their full potential, and I think that Putin, no, I'm sure of it. When Putin started the war, he expected it to be quick and easy. He thought it would last 2 or 3 days. People would welcome them with flowers and there would be no violence. So Putin wants to end this war. But if you keep making Putin angry and telling him, well, I won't say it, I like to swear, but again, I'm looking at this as a businessman. In order to make a deal with someone, you need to get them in the right mood to make a deal with me. And if I keep criticizing him to his face, well, not to his face, but telling everyone behind his back, then it's unlikely I'll be able to achieve my goals. Well, I'm the kind of person who says, I don't know how. I just say what I think. Not exactly like a Chukchi. I might not say something, but in general, I'm quite a very straightforward person. So, well, I am who I am. That's why I get a lot of hate.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. So, what made you decide to start on YouTube in the first place? Is it only in America that Democrats need to sideline leftists?
Uh, I live in Manhattan, and I happened to meet someone here in Manhattan in Central Park, and he was filming something there. And he heard me speaking Russian on the phone. His name is Zhenya, and it turned out he's a YouTuber. And we talked. It turned out he's from Minsk. I'm from Minsk. And he said, I'm planning to go to Chicago. I said, oh, I live in Chicago. He said, but you live here. I said, well, I live in Chicago too. He said, I'm coming there. I said, come and I'll show you Chicago. So he came, and while I was showing him around, he said, hey, maybe I can make a video about you. So he released a couple of videos about me, and I was in one of his developer videos. In fact, he released 3 videos, and he said, why don't you do YouTube? And I said, of course, I have a lot I want to say. He said, well, maybe you should try it. I said, well, let's see if I like it or not. And then he released a video, but it got banned on his channel. It's called something like From Poverty to the Owner of a Formula One Team. And the second one is about Trump, about the building. I live there in the Trump building. So he released these 2 videos, and people like, well, the feedback was good. I thought, well, I should start too. That's him. I think it was in October 2024. And that's when I started. And yes, it turned out to be an opportunity for me to express my thoughts, what I'm thinking about. And my channel, I literally changed it just recently. It's called that because everyone writes to me saying, your channel isn't about the animal world, and it's not for people. Well, it's for thinking people. I changed it and wrote a serious channel for reasonable people. And I even said in a recent video that I'm almost in favor of a dictatorship in America, but a dictatorship of common sense. Because in America, under the Democrats, and it still continues, there is really a dictatorship of perverted nonsense. That's why I'm for a dictatorship of common sense, for the law. And so, yes, back then I started and I talked about what exactly is twisted here. That we live in some kind of, well, strange reality.
Mm-hmm. I just clarified, and it's interesting for myself and for the viewers. You mentioned that in Kiev, in Ukraine, there was an unpleasant business incident. Well, if you want to talk more about this topic.
Well, I won't say much. I had development projects. I had partners in Kiev, and they stole a lot of money. And I didn't realize it. I started there in 2005. And in Russia at that time, many people were focused on boosting valuations. That is, they wanted to get high valuations. So in 2007, the company reached its peak and was valued at $9 billion on the New York Stock Exchange. And I saw that in Russia, people work for capitalization. And I thought it was the same in Ukraine. It turned out, and I only realized this later, that people don't believe in the political system or something like that. And they wanted, you transfer money, they steal it right away. I didn't understand that. And so we ended up with such partners. And I had already met with some people who were there. There was one young guy when Chernovetsky was the mayor. And this guy, I don't remember his last name, he was the head of the city council.
It must have been Olesdovi.
Yeah, probably, a young guy.
Yeah, such a kid.
Well, I don't want to swear. I mean, there was fantastic corruption there. Everyone wanted to steal right away. No one believed in the future. Well, maybe that's why the mentality is like that new presidents keep coming all the time. And thank God that the government changes. But still, nobody believes that you can build something for the future. That's what happened to me. I lost many millions of dollars. More than 10, I don't want to say how much, just that it was a lot.
And those people who ended up in this situation with you, do you keep track of them? Are they still major public figures?
No, of course not. One of them ended up in prison because of this. And the second one, well, and I had another partner there who behaved very inappropriately. Well, all right, I don't want to. I've already let it go. But I'm saying, you can't say like Ukrainians are bad because they're all like that. It just doesn't work that way. Or all Russians are like that, or all Jews are like that. But for example, there are some mental characteristics in each. Well, it's not even about nationality, but well, in different regions. There, in some regions, well, let's say deceiving someone is like considered cool. I deceived him, and that's cool. But in another place, it's looked down upon. You see, in one place, stealing is considered cool, but in another, you could get your hand cut off for stealing. That's why I look at different regions of the world this way. And well, in Ukraine, I had a bad experience like that.
Mhm. And considering that you are originally from Belarus, have you ever had any thoughts or offers to participate in Belarusian politics? Well, considering that Lukashenko is, of course, a dictator, but maybe with the opposition or something like that.
No, never. First of all, I don't even have any Belarusian documents. I don't live there. I just did business there. But just between us, when Lukashenko became president, I left Minsk 2 days later. And everything was fine for me there. I wasn't doing anything illegal. But I realized, well, again, I understand the psychology. I left Minsk. That was in 1994. And I came back to Minsk for the first time in 2007. So after 13 years, even though I had a business there, I didn't go there. And then in 2012, for a couple of days, and I even had a funny conversation with some Americans here about Lukashenko. When there were those, in 2020, when there were elections in Belarus, and about 1 million people came out because they were against the falsifications, the election fraud. And I was sitting in a cafe here near my house, and I started talking with some Americans. I said, I'm from Belarus. They said, oh, we're watching what's happening with your people. And then many of them were put in prison. They said, Lukashenko is the richest man in the world. I said, what do you mean the richest man in the world? They said, well, he probably has $100 billion. I said, and what does that mean? They said, well, we're almost certain that he has $100 billion. I said, but I think he has nothing. They said, how come nothing? I said, he doesn't have any 100 billion. He even says, whoever finds my money in the banks, take it for yourself. They said, so do you really think he doesn't have any money? I said, yes, 100%. I said, look, when these protests started, Lukashenko was really looking at these people with surprise. He didn't understand what was going on. I tell them, these Americans, they say, what do you mean? I say, well, he has a business. They ask, what kind of business does he have? I say, you don't know what his business is? They say, no, we don't know. I say, the country of Belarus, that's his business. Some people try to take his business and the country from him. That's why I say he has a country, not money.
Yeah, just like Putin. That's how it is.
It's not the same with Putin. Russia is much bigger. Putin makes decisions, but they are different people. Lukashenko is a very charismatic person, and when people interact with him like that, they say he really gives off that kind of energy. Putin is different. He's always Putin when he talks to people. Well, sometimes you have to push Putin to make him act like that, but usually he talks and recruits them. That is, he says what they want to hear. They are sure that they have convinced him of everything. They almost feel like they're friends with him, but then it turns out that everything is different. But first of all, I never wanted to get into politics. I understand that politics is a dirty business, and I'm not interested in it. But keeping up with politics and understanding politics has always been very important to me.
Uh-huh. Tell me, what do you think is the best way out of the war right now? And what is the path forward? Actually, let's put it this way. Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. What needs to happen for things to change there? We all understand perfectly well that apart from capitalism, there is no other path for development. And I started to doubt that.
Dennis, sorry, even at Mamdam in New York about how elections are stolen, just recently with Spencer Pratt in Los Angeles. What Governor Pritzker of Illinois is doing, the mayor of Chicago is an idiot. And that's even with Johnson there. He's an African-American racist, really, because when it comes to white people, this mayor, and I live in Chicago, brags that his top management team has 30 people. Do you know how many white people are among those 30? The top managers of the Chicago mayor? Do you know?
How much money?
Zero. They're all African-American, all of them, 30 people. Pritzker, who is the governor, a billionaire, is aiming to become president. So leftists like AOC, Bernie Sanders, and well, I follow this very closely because I'm interested in them as people. I'm interested in Mamdani. That Mamdani didn't go to the Israeli parade, but there was literally, I live 1 block from Fifth Avenue, and there was a Puerto Rican parade there. Mamdani went to the Puerto Rican parade, but not to the Israeli one. At the same time, there are Jews here who are with him, and they say, we're against Israel, they should be held accountable for genocide in Gaza, and so on. That's the former New York City comptroller. His name slipped my mind. Well, he's a complete scumbag. So Mamdani is dangerous because he's a scoundrel. In Chicago, that mayor, Brandon Johnson, he's an idiot, really. He's a complete idiot. But here he's a scoundrel. He understands perfectly well that it's impossible to do what he's promising. You can't give everything to everyone for free, but he does it. The question is why? Well, it's obvious why. To get more power. Well, that's a long topic, and I really like talking about these things because I understand what's going on. And even now, I'm starting to get concerned about what the socialists are doing both in Boston and in Seattle, where people are leaving. And, well, there's a lot going on. So I'm not sure about the capitalist system. In general, the world is heading in an uncertain direction. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is quietly or not so quietly slipping into poverty. The whole system isn't working right, and illegal migration in America and in Europe. That is, now the pendulum has swung so far to the left that soon it will swing to the right. But if we look at Russia, people there don't have as many guns, while in America there are a lot of guns. And we think if some dictator comes to power, people will come out with guns. But people are so brainwashed by propaganda that they no longer understand what's true and what's not. They'll look at something black, be convinced it's white, and they'll say, yes, this is white and that's black. That's why, of course, the whole world system needs to be changed somehow. I think it will break down and change. And now Trump, again, I don't understand what Trump is doing in Iran. There are many things I don't understand about what Trump does. Or rather, I partially understand, and some people think that I'm a Trump supporter. I'm not a Trump supporter, I'm a realist. I look at what some people do, what others do, who promises what to whom, and I don't pay attention to what anyone says. I only look at actions. What's the point of paying attention to what people say? There's no point. You should judge by actions.
Going back to the plan, what do you see as a realistic solution? Of course, everyone wants something fantastic. But from the real situation, what is a real way out, an end to the war that would more or less satisfy everyone?
Well, I think, again, it's Trump who will somehow force Zelensky to sign a peace agreement, and on the other hand, force Putin to sign one as well. He will make a deal with the Europeans. And so maybe something is happening right now at this G7 in France. Not in France, in Switzerland. But Trump, he's also a politician, so he's not just a businessman. So I think he'll put pressure in some ways, in some places, so that neither Zelensky nor Putin will have any choice left. At the same time, on one hand, Zelensky will promise but not follow through, which is what he's already doing. And that's why the Americans have already realized. They're saying, what's the point of always coming back to the same place? Negotiations are underway. They've already reached an agreement, shook hands, and then suddenly Zelensky announces, no, we're not going to do that. And he starts writing letters to Putin and starts criticizing. I released this video a week ago. Why did Zelensky write this letter to Putin? It's called something like, why provoke the dragon, I think. Well, I say, and people write to me, why did you write? Why did you read this letter? I say, well, I read it because 99.9% of people haven't read it. They've only heard about it from different commentators. And for example, Medusa writes, Zelensky proposed peace to Putin, and Putin refused. But if you're offering peace and saying, you're an asshole, excuse my language, I say to you, like, let's meet and sign a peace agreement. But it's impossible to make a deal like that. That's why they write like that, Medusa, because Medusa is liberal. But in Russia, they say it differently. So that's the question. But I try to think critically, and I look at all perspectives. I watch CNN in America and Fox News too. I mean, I want to know all points of view so I can figure out for myself what's right and what's just another provocation.
So, in your opinion, Zelensky doesn't want the war to end, but Putin does?
Putin wants to, I think. And Zelensky also wants the war to end. But, remember, wants to but can't. Who is that? That's an impotent man. And can but doesn't want to. That's a scoundrel. Remember that saying? So for Zelensky, ending the war is a personal problem. I see. That's what I think. I've thought this way for a long time. To be continued. Okay.
But why would Putin want to end the war? I get that he's ready, but you said he wants to. Why is that?
Because why does Putin need this war? I don't know. I don't understand why he started it in the first place. But again, he started it because he thought it would end quickly. And then all of it just sucked him in. I'm almost sure he doesn't want to. But if you hurt him, insult him as a person, well, he's very vindictive. Well, how can you? That's why, but in general, I think he wants to end the war. And why? Well, look, all of Putin's entourage, all of his circle, they used to live in their palaces in France, in Italy. Everywhere on their coolest yachts, the biggest in the world. They dictated whatever they wanted everywhere. They had football clubs all over the world. I mean, they were basically the main people in the world. And then the war happened. And these people turned into, it's like they're no longer the main ones, but almost like they're in prison, almost like they're outcasts. Remember who the outcasts are. I mean, they were basically limited to Dubai, and now they can't even go to Dubai or maybe to Turkey, but they want to go to France, to the Mediterranean Sea, to the coast, but they're not allowed in. And Putin understands this too, that his friends in his circle, because of the war, well, look at how they're living now. They're like prisoners. On one hand, on the other hand, they also understand that the sanctions won't be lifted right away. But if Trump tells Putin, listen, come on, sign it like this. And to Zelensky, come on, sign it like this. If they agree, maybe Trump will promise to lift the sanctions. Exactly which ones, or maybe even many of them. Just like Trump, well, that's what they signed. For now, it's a memorandum, and in a week with Iran. Trump also promised a lot of things, and this IRGC will see that peace is more beneficial for them than standing their ground and fighting. And Trump? Well, of course, I thought, how many times do I have to tell you? One moment we're bombing, the next we're not. I understand, it's business negotiations. But for him, the main thing is the result. If we look at the result, today oil is trading at its lowest in 3 months. There, I think Brent is around 78 or 79. So it's clear that the reservoirs need to be filled right away. But if the war stops, and of course, I'm keeping an eye on what's happening in Israel. And Israel says we'll still carry out our operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon no matter what. But if the war with Iran stops, I think it will be better for the whole world. So Trump is a developer. And developers, they first demolish and then they build, right? So he is breaking the world order and then building it to suit himself. Although Trump is being attacked everywhere to the fullest extent. Trump is looking down at a basketball game. They say Trump is sleeping. Trump did something, Trump and so on. Well, of course, he can't stand it anymore either, all this persecution and harassment. But nevertheless, I believe once again, no matter how I feel about Trump, my opinion is that Trump is the best thing that could have happened for the world. or the world would have ended up in such a situation. Because what was happening in Europe with the illegals, and now there's a rollback starting. I believe there will be a right-wing rollback. In Germany, in France, and in England, it will be everywhere. And it will happen in America too.
Another problem is that now you see any movement to the right is almost considered fascism because everything has become so stagnant, especially in Europe.
So now I released a video and what? Well, there I'm regularly called a racist, right? So I'm riding the subway. Across from me sits a mother with a girl. The girl is about 11 years old. The girl is peeling an orange in the subway and tossing the peels on the floor, right? And I say to my wife, well, but this wasn't now. It was a year ago or maybe two, maybe even more. Trump wasn't president. She says, don't. You've already gotten in trouble a few times. Everyone calls you a racist. So if you tell a black thief, I mean an African American, that he's a thief, you're a racist. If you tell a girl, don't litter here, you're a racist. So, well, here, if there's a man who said he's a woman, his name is Lee Thomas, he's white, he competes in swimming competitions, he beats everyone. Well, he said he's a woman, okay? You declared that you're a woman and you compete with girls and you keep winning against them. And the left says, yes, that's normal. Is there a claim that 5 genders exist? At least. Oh, the Democrats say 5 genders. What are the 5 genders? Well, that's why, they just distort common sense so much. That's why I say, maybe it's time to start a dictatorship of common sense. And not of a distorted consciousness.
It's a madhouse. I apologize for jumping between topics. I forgot to ask you about Putin. It just came up in the middle of your speech. Do you think there's absolutely no chance to move Putin out of power, for example, by the oligarchs? Or is the KGB so powerful that they could remove him?
I don't think any oligarchs can remove him from power. No one can remove him. But then again, we don't know about palace coups. But why would those people around him who protect him want to remove him if everything is going well for them?
You just said they're nearly outcast oligarchs. Yes, the oligarchs.
Of course. And who are the oligarchs now? They're just holding it. Of it, not his, it doesn't matter. It's kind of theirs, but at the same time, not really theirs.
So they put him in jail?
I knew him, Mashkovich. Agra slipped my mind. His holding is worth 3 billion. They took everything. An oligarch. For what? It's not clear why. I know many people who were put in jail, and people are in prison, oligarchs. So today you're an oligarch, and tomorrow you're an inmate in prison, and you have nothing. There's Galitsky, who just recently fled the country, but it's the same story. They took a lot from him too, but I think he has something in the West. So oligarchs in Russia are not really oligarchs. An oligarch is a person who has power and can influence that power in the country, right? But how can which of them can actually influence anything? They're afraid to say a word because, well, they could lose everything. They didn't want to. They're not oligarchs. There are none.
Oligarch. So Abramovich is the same, right? In the same position.
Yes, I think he's in the same position. I mean, it's a different matter. Abramovich doesn't live in Russia all the time. Again, I'm just saying what I think. Because again, I said that Putin will shake hands and do what he said. But that's what I think. So Putin, again, one of his qualities, he's not a complete scoundrel. He has done very bad things. But in some things, he follows certain principles. The people who put him in his position, well, helped him become who he is. He never did anything bad to them. Abramovich is either the main one or one of the main ones who put him there. So even if Abramovich does something wrong, I don't think Putin will do anything to him. So what about Berezovsky?
The case of Berezovsky.
I read about that. I was acquainted with Berezovsky. And I read about it. And once when I started supplying cars in 1991, Logovaz sent us a request. That's his company. I'm American. I started with one car that I bought at an auction in 1991. That's how my business began. Later, I was sending furniture, clothes, electronics, a lot of things. Well, that's when we were also sending cars to Logovaz. I read that Putin allowed Berezovsky to return at some point, but for some reason it didn't happen. That's why you asked, did Berezovsky make Putin? Well, yes, he did, but Berezovsky didn't come back. And at that moment, maybe Berezovsky thought that well, I don't know, maybe his own influence went to his head, because a lot of people do. And again, if we go back to Zelensky, when he came to the Oval Office, met with Trump and had an argument, before that he was greeted by about 30 people, congressmen and senators. And he really felt like a person who stands guard over the entire Western world against the barbarians, and he got carried away. Because the Europeans also kept honoring him all the time, and it was done on purpose somehow.
Because they figured out that he was vain, and that's their way of controlling him.
I don't think it was on purpose. I don't think it was on purpose. Again, Putin managed to keep it together for many years, so he wouldn't lose his mind. You know how hard it is? There's that saying about fire, water, and the temptations of fame, right? The hardest thing is fame. The hardest thing is not making money, not even keeping it, but surviving fame. When everyone says how outstanding you are.
Yes, I understand.
Let me say it again. When I criticize Zelensky, many people think I'm criticizing Ukraine, but no, I'm for Ukraine. I believe that Zelensky is now preventing Ukrainians, in my opinion, from ending the war from a certain point on. And I don't want the war to continue and for people to die. And strangely enough, Trump is a cynic, but he also doesn't want people to die. Because apparently, for Trump, there is the arms industry. Yes, there could be many different reasons, but for him, human life is still sacred. I'm sure of that. No matter how much people criticize him, that's why he also wants to stop the war. And Trump, just imagine, Trump could have bombed Iran on a massive scale. He could have. But he didn't bomb them. He doesn't want human casualties. Yeah, maybe he would have problems in America for that, but he doesn't do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sandra, thank you.
Dennis, I'm an emotional person, but today I wasn't very emotional.
So you held it together, right?
We came here, I just came to talk with you. This isn't really an interview, but it turned out that you're asking me questions, and I'm also curious how you ended up living like this. Why did you, well, you say that I watched your videos. Not all of them, of course, but I watch them from time to time. You're quite critical, very critical of Zelensky. Why is that? Well,
I was doing business in Ukraine and then the war happened. I knew there would be a war, nobody ran away. There was a pause for 2 or 3 weeks, then the business stopped, everything is going on, serious donations to the army, everything is fine. Then, just like you, only a bit earlier, the devil pushed me to start a YouTube channel. And I just saw what was starting to happen. I saw the propaganda. They shut down television. There was Russian propaganda on that side. I had always felt I had something to say and thought this was my moment. And then when the existential threat was over, as you correctly said, in Istanbul, everything became clear. And back then, at the beginning of the war, they got into the same boat as the people. That's how it felt when they were truly scared. And then, when the army heroically fought back, it wasn't their achievement, it was the army's. The army fought off Putin's onslaught. Then again, they pushed the people aside, and the entrepreneurs, the real entrepreneurs in the market. I'm not talking about those who make money off the government. To me, they're not businessmen. And the security services got involved. All these maximum censorship measures were put in place. I really intensified these things and started having problems. Did you have to in Ukraine? In Ukraine, I had to leave. I went to America. And in 2024, in November, he sent the SBU, the special service, to the apartment where my mom and grandmother live. They conducted a search there. And what was the reason? My mom doesn't participate in politics at all. She's completely uninvolved. Let's say she doesn't even like what I do. It's not like I said I got involved in this. And she made the mistake of reposting one of my video stream on Facebook. No one reads it. Again, she's not a public figure. That was the reason. They're accusing her of justifying Russian aggression. Verifica todo.
So, almost like in Russia, a person gets punished for a repost and labeled as a foreign agent, and you can end up in prison.
Despite my strong dislike for Putin, as far as I know, he hasn't targeted anyone's parents, even those of opposition members.
Well, remember with Khodorkovsky, he didn't touch anyone. Not the parents, not the family. No one.
Berezovsky's mother is in Russia. Chichvarkin's mother is in Russia.
He, once again, he has some principles. I also have a very negative attitude towards him, but he has principles.
Zelensky apparently doesn't have any. And of course, the criticism started in May 2022. I made a picture there, a video. Zelensky in the image of Stalin. I just sensed it very subtly and tried to explain it to people. Everything will lead to a very harsh dictatorship. He is starting to follow Russia and Putin's playbook in all this. And, well, I didn't even think that it would get to this kind of bussification with some things. Forced mobilization is being done here by force. It's lawless, absolutely lawless. Well, actually, a lot of things, and I've been doing this for 5 years now, but I want to go back. I'm waiting for the regime to fall. I want to go back.
Well, I hope that everything will be fine in Ukraine, and I hope that this will end. I read today that Zelensky said at the G7 that the war needs to be finished before winter, because last winter was terrible for us. And you will also have a terrible winter if we don't finish it. Yes, but Putin doesn't care what kind of winter it will be. You understand that, right? I mean, in Russia, he does whatever he wants. And the more you pressure him, the less chance there is that he, again, over there in Russia, it's just one person making all the decisions. In Ukraine, I think Zelensky certainly makes decisions, but not alone. In Belarus, one person makes the decisions. And in Russia, one person makes the decisions. And these people, that's why I released the video, Why Feed the Dragon? Because, well, again, if you want people to live in peace, to have a peaceful sky above your head, and for people to work, Russia, Ukraine today, God forbid being in Ukraine today. Even on my posts that I put out on YouTube, people write, we can't comment because we're afraid we'll be put in jail. Well, I used to think that was in Russia. I used to say, well, in Ukraine, there's freedom. They say you should come and see what kind of freedom there is.
They spread this image worldwide through globalist media outlets. He was recently on Sky News in Britain. Then he has Pinchak there. There's an oligarch, a support group of those who are with the Democrats. They just brought Usyk, the boxer. He performed here in America the other day. He says, Ukraine has absolute free speech and Ukrainians immediately influence the authorities. So it's a very powerful game, but it's just disgusting. It's just disgusting. And it's a pity. People had years of their lives stolen from them, and some even lost their lives entirely.
That's why many people feel this way.
Yes.
And unfortunately, this is happening. Well, the worst thing is that there is a war in Ukraine and people are dying. And of course, the reason I talk about this so emotionally is because others say, just relax. Why do you care if people are dying there? I say, I do care. It's sad. We need to stop it. So, well, one girl wrote a comment to me. What? Are you ready to give up land to Russia? She said, you can't give up land. And then she writes, I'm crying here. My uncle is fighting on the front line. So I say, what's more important to you, the land that can't be given up or your uncle who could be killed? She says, well, of course, my uncle. I say, so maybe we should give it up first and then deal with the land later so people don't die. Because one thing is the people and another thing is your uncle. Father, brother, do you understand?
Propaganda really messed with their minds and brainwashed them there.
So they brainwashed people here in America too by, as I say, the Jews. Well, mostly Ukrainians here, but there are a lot of them too. But those Ukrainians who are in America, they left because of the war. They don't want this war. Many of them left. They're not here because they're for the war. But on the other hand, maybe many people now say, we can't give up the territories. Well, fine, then go back there, return. And when someone tells me, like, if Putin strikes harder, one very famous person told me this, then all of Ukraine will mobilize. I say, so why did they leave? Couldn't they have mobilized earlier if they left the country? Well, everyone has their own reasons because, well, they don't see the point. It's one thing if everything is for the front and for victory, and it's another thing when the leadership is stealing and there's corruption. That's why it also annoys me that if all that money had gone to the army and towards victory, maybe the result would have been different by now.
You see, there's also the question, what for? That's how they present it, and that's what I thought at the beginning of the war. A tyranny attacked democracy. It turned out a big tyrant attacked a small one. The big Soviet-style regime is fighting the little Soviet-style regime. 100%.
100%?
That's the scariest thing.
Yes, 100%. I agree with you. And that's why I'm saying again, when I'm being pressured from both sides, I don't want to use strong words, by those people and by those from Russia about this. And they tell me, why do you even need this? Just don't talk about these topics. Honestly, I don't want to discuss these topics anymore. Well, how can I help if their brains have been washed and people don't see reality? They just look at things in a certain way. Well, you just can't do anything about it. I'm telling you, some people have TDS. That's Trump. How does it stand for again? They just can't get over Trump syndrome. They can't see with clear eyes. Their minds are clouded. You can't convince them of anything, no matter what you say. Well, Dennis, unfortunately, that's the way the world is right now. Both you and I, we're trying somehow, to explain things to people in advance so they think about it. And when that girl, the one who's talking, you can't give up territories, but when you ask her, can you kill your uncle? No, the uncle is more important than territories. So maybe we should stop first and then deal with the territory. That already makes people think, what should we do and why is it like this?
Yes, I hope so. Thank you very much. Thank you for the conversation. Yes.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.